is that a lot of the classes are only offered on certain semesters. So it can make setting up your schedule a little complicated. So I'm glad to help you with that if you like. This summer, we have some 5-week classes going on. Last summer, a lot of my 120 students took advantage of the 5-week C#1 class, and I think they all did really well. You have to be pretty focused for that 5 weeks just on C#, but then it's all done after that. And a lot of people decide to take C#1 through the summer so that they can take C#2 in the fall, and that kind of gives you sort of a jump ahead. The other ones that are being offered that are 5 weeks are the Web Dev 1 and 2. So we have C#1 and 2 and Web Dev 1 and 2. They're really fast. I mean, they move really fast. You have to be really ready to do them. So I don't know about C#2. For C#2, I think like if we have people who are kind of already have some experience and they're in the classes to get the classes over with, you know, those people are good for C#2. I hate to talk anybody out of it because I'd love to have the class make this summer, but it can definitely be challenging. But C#1, all of you guys that have been, you know, keeping on top of your assignments and stuff, you probably would like going through it at that rate of speed because it moves pretty quickly. But a lot of the concepts are the same. You know, we'll go through how to declare variables, how to, you know, set up basic code statements, you know, math statements and things like that, how to set up if statements and loops. And so it's different than Python, but yet the same concepts. So it does go. So again, let me know. Happy to look at your schedule with you. I love that it's all online. I used to spend, way back in the dark ages, I would sit in the cave with my pencil and piece of paper and map out what my schedule was going to be at Missouri State, and I would do it over and over and over. So I would have loved to have been able to have that ability to do the timeline thing where you can plan ahead. So if you haven't seen that, let me know. We're looking at lists and tables this week. We are on the downhill for sure. We just have a few weeks left. So we'll be looking at processing lists and arrays. We've done a lot of this work already because you guys are familiar with for statements. You know how looping through repeating structures works, and arrays just kind of lend themselves to that. Next week, we'll kind of work a little bit more with arrays, and we'll read an image file, and we'll glitch an image. If you've never seen that, it's pretty neat. We'll just distort some of the pixels in the image, change them to different values so we can make something black and white or apply some different effects to it. And then week 15, we'll talk about object-oriented programming. We won't really have assignments for that, and then we'll be looking at the final. So things are moving really, really quickly. Here for arrays, we're going to be talking about it in class, doing a little bit of practice. You do have an assignment, and we'll make something that's actually pretty similar to that in class. Let's take a look at it, and some of you might think that you could do that already. We'll be prompting a user for their first and last name, and then we'll be doing a little string manipulation to see how long their name is, how many letters are in the first name, how many letters are in the last name. So that's the assignment we'll be working towards being able to do. And because we have Thursday off, let me know if you're feeling pressure for that due date, because we might need to change it to next Thursday. Let's see what we have it as right now. Yeah, right now it's set for Tuesday. I'm just going to change it right now to Thursday. May not be an issue for you, but just in case. Because we could spend a little bit more time with our array handling. So in our module, like I said, I just updated the PowerPoint for week 13. So let's grab it. This one, Array Structures by Riley. see if I can get it to work and shut this door. Person is that is pretty quiet today. Don't be quiet up there. All over. All right, so arrays. Arrays are collections of things. So some of us like to make collections of things, and we like to keep track of all of the things in the collection, sometimes more so than others. So we can think of an array or a list in Python as just a data structure that holds repeating data. So I could create a variable if I wanted to keep track of 6 team members. I could create team member 1 variable, team member 2, team member 3, team member 4, team member 5, team member 6, but it would be very redundant. I would hate coding that, and especially when I tried to do anything with those variables, and I had to do the same thing with all 6 variables, it would get really overwhelming. So what we can do is create a list, a structure of a repeating data, and that'll let us more efficiently process that data and save it. One thing about arrays or lists is usually they have to be allocated before they can be used, and that just means we tell Python or the operating system that we're going to create a list structure or an array structure. So if you think about variables, we've used a lot. We've seen we can have numeric variables and string variables, and one variable can hold one piece of data. So again, if we need some repeating things, like a whole collection or a list of names, we can use an array or a list structure. Usually the array or list structure is associated with these square brackets. So we're going to see those a lot as we start working with arrays and list structures. So if I type this statement in Python, name equal open square bracket, close square bracket, that tells Python name is going to be a list. It doesn't have any entries in that list, but it's going to be a list. Now I can add entries to that list, and then my list is going to look something like this. So here I have 5 people's names in this name collection. This number over here is a pointer, because how do I know which person's name I want to look at in that list? Well, I need to have some sort of unique identifier or pointer into that specific position in my list. And I use that number to do that. The number is called an index. So the index is an integer, and it's used as a pointer into the array. What entry are we referring to? Our index numbers always begin with 0. And we saw that a little bit as we were doing our loops and our for statements, that we can get off by 1 really easily because of that. Index structures are the same way, the same issue, where we have to be careful with what we're working with and remember that our index value starts at 0. The index value for the word Tammy here in our list is 2. So we could say Tammy is in name index position 2. You might also hear somebody say she's at name subscript 2. So subscript is another term you might use for an index. Now, if I wanted to change Tammy's name to the value new name, I could say, looking at the name list at position 2, set that equal to this new name. And then after I ran that line of code, that entry would be updated to show that new name. Now, I could create a list of people's ages. Here's some code. Go ahead and open Python, and let's type this code in so you can see what it does. It's just a few lines. Don't have to make a fancy program or anything. I look at you guys' stuff and I look at something like this and it feels like you've gone from, you know, writing children's books to major novels or something. Did you hear something on the news yesterday about some woman who wrote a novel on her phone? I didn't hear the whole story. She said she was doing it whenever she could. She's done some sort of publishing software or something fancy. So in this one, you're going to start out setting up this list of ages. And this syntax that we're using, we're going to have the whole list of ages values that we want to be put into this array within these square brackets. So instead of just saying age equal open and close square brackets, make me an empty list, we're going to say age equals all these different values enclosed within those square brackets. So the square brackets can be the values that we want in the array if it's an initial array allocation like this. Now after that, the print statements are using the square brackets to hold the index values. To say I want to print out the age at index position 4. Which one is that? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 14. So that's the highest one that we have. What happens when you run that last line of code? That 5 is too big. Might have to comment that line out to run the others. So I have some here in PyCharm. I've got that age list that I'm creating, like you guys have, and then the print statement to print out the entry at 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That should print 14. And then the next line of code should print out the very first entry. So that should print the number 1. Now I have the entry to print out the age at the 5th index position commented out because that'll cause it to cancel. So let me make that run. So it cancels if I leave that print statement in there and it says that index is out of range. That means it's out of the range of our index valid values for this array. So if I made it like -1, that would be bad, out of range. 57, bad. So whatever size our array is going to be the limit. So let's comment that back out. And let's use a line of code that lets us know how many entries are in our array. I'll print how many entries. And then for our age array, when you type the name of that list, you'll see if you're using PyCharm, PyCharm will display all of the valid commands that you can use with a list in Python. So what I'm looking for is something that tells me how many entries are in this list. We'll use some of those others later. I guess PyCharm doesn't show us those things. If PyCharm isn't going to show us, we'll Google how many entries in a list. Python. I made that kind of a long search, didn't I? It says the count method returns the number of occurrences. The length method, the list length method. So I'm going to try that one. Age.len. So I guess PyCharm was showing it to me. It just had a whole bunch of underscores around it, so I didn't recognize it. So let's try using that function. So that function, remember, just like if we create a user-defined function, we can run it. This is a function that was created when the list was created in Python, and we can use that function. It says list object has no attribute length. See what's wrong. Can I count it? It said I should be able to do that. It says, oh, I got an integer. So I'm going to put my age dot count inside of a string statement. And it's still being mad at me. I'm going to like just give it to you guys and say, can you troubleshoot this, please? Back to Google. My tutorials point says that I should return the count, use the count method. And it says my alist.count. Oh, look, it's a little different, isn't it? So the count is going to count how many times it finds a specific value. So like 1, 2, 3, or ZARA. So that's really interesting. Not exactly what I was looking for. What is it?
String and then blank or LEN.
Oh, we have to put the list name. Okay, so let me fix it. So just like we wrap our string function around the number, we're going to wrap our length function around our list. So we're saying, I need one more parenthesis to close there for my print statement. We're saying, use the length function on this age list. And then we're saying, use the string function on that resulting output to make it something that I can print. Does that work? Good job. Good job, Jack. All right, so we can find out the length of our list. We can find out how many times different entries occur within our list, right? Lots of things that are really helpful for us. But we cannot go outside of the range of our valid index entry or we get that out of range error. So we can be aware of that. Oh, look at that awesomeness. It is animated. Okay, so some things about a list. When we're working with an array, when the array is allocated, it can be allocated out of contiguous memory. That means that all of the entries in the array must fit side by side in the available RAM that we have in the system. So if we make a list of things that's got 32 million entries, we could use a lot of memory, depending on how big those things are. Most systems today have a lot of memory, so that shouldn't cause too much trouble. So we find enough memory to allocate this list. It all gets set up and all of these entries are out there. Now, if you look at it, this awesome PowerPoint animation-ness, let's see if I can do it right. Whenever we're looking at this entry 16, our index value is 0. Whoops, it didn't do it. It's on another slide. Our index value is 0. When we're looking at this entry 45, our index value is 1. Actually, there's a typo there, isn't there? I'm going to fix this very first one because that could be very confusing. So all of those index values are associated with the appropriate value in the array. This array was allocated with initialization. We supplied the initial values as we started. If we go through all of the entries on that line of code, we started with the name of our array. All of the values are within the square brackets, separated by commas, and that's going to determine the initial size of our array. If we want to use one of the entries in our array, we can specify the array name followed by the index location within square brackets. So if I want to set the variable oneAge equal to the entry at index location 3 of my age array, I'm going to use syntax like this. So the variable to hold my entry is going to be equal to the array name followed by my index pointer. Now, if I want to update the entry in the array, we use the array name followed by the index value, and then we set it equal to whatever new value we want. So nothing difficult. It's just that now, instead of just a variable name, we can use a variable name with an index location to specify an entry. Whenever we're using a list like this, we often want to look at all of the values in the list. We refer to that as traversing the array, or sometimes even walking the array, but it's where we're checking all of the entries. So let's think about this for loop here. With for loops, in you guys' experience with them, you've done this kind of a lot already. So here our for loop says, for a thing in our age list, I want to print out that thing. So as our for loop executes, first we're going to be looking at this 0 entry and see that number 16. Then we'll be looking at the 1 entry in our array, and our thing variable will be set to 45. When we move to the next entry in the array, our thing variable will become 29. And as we walk or traverse that array, our for variable will become the value of each entry in the array. Now, because with our Python syntax, the way our for works is kind of the way a for each loop works in other languages, which means that that index value is going to be kind of internal. We're not going to actually see that as part of our for loop, are we? So if we want to know that index value, we might have to keep track of it ourselves somehow externally, like with a counter or something. But that's okay, because we can use that for loop to get each of our values. So our syntax is for, just like our other for loops, whatever we want to call each of our entries, then our in keyword, and then our list name. We follow that with a colon because it is a statement that has a body. Now, when we're working with arrays, sometimes we want more than one piece of data. So we might want to associate an employee name with their ID. And in our program, we don't have any good way to do that. We can set up parallel arrays. And a parallel array is 2 arrays that I keep in sync, side by side. So in this situation, we have 2 arrays, the age array and the name array. Sorry, I said employee ID, it's employee's age or a person. So for Joe, we're saying that he is 16. For Bill, who is name index value 1, his age is 45, and we see that in the age array in index value 1. New name person here matches that age. Vera is 24 and Austin is 14. So parallel arrays are just 2 lists or 2 arrays that we keep in sync so that we can keep track of multiple different values. We might also create a 2-dimensional array. I don't have much in here about that, kind of a matrix. So that can be a data structure that we might want to use too. We see as we'll create more and more types of data structures in programming, that our multidimensional arrays can be simplified and we can use things that are a little bit easier than that to work with. But basically, in a nutshell, arrays are a list in Python. So Python uses what it calls a list structure to keep track of these things. They're pretty easy for us to use with all of the code that we've already done. They'll be real easy for us to walk through. So let's try a loop in that array that we created in our PyCharm file. Right now we're printing out each of the different ages. Let's add some code here to use a for loop to print each age. So let's call our variable 1 age. In our age list, we want to print 1 age. I'm going to put some print statements here. End of list. And I think I'll put a print statement before it. Begin of list. Okay, so now the output is getting a little more interesting. I see my begin of list and end of list strings, and within that, here is each of my array entries. Now, what could I do if I wanted to like multiply each of those by 57? Could I say multiplied by 57? And then I want to output as a string 1 age times 57. So sometimes when the assignment asks you to do things like that, it can be off-putting. But remember, we can do anything like that that we want to within our loop. So if I wanted to double that number or quadruple it or anything that I wanted to do, I could. Any questions? I'm getting one set here I want to look at for us to create. There we are. I've got to look at some here. Let's start out with some that we can do. Oops. Let's talk about what would happen if we had a bunch of strings. So we're going to process a sentence. So I want to create a new Python file here. And let's call this, we are at arrays, and it should be chapter 10 in our book, but let me double check because I don't want us to get even worse organization. Chapter 7. So chapter 7, array sentence. So is a sentence an array? Well, it is really, if we think about it as an array of words. And that's kind of like what we need to do for the assignment this week, looking at names. So I'm going to start out with some comments. If I can zoom in here. We'll just call this sentence, and let's see how we can work with strings and arrays at the same time. Copied the date. We're not quite that far. Look at you guys being so far ahead. So let's analyze this sentence. For our program, I'd like to prompt the user for a sentence and then maybe count how many words there are in that sentence. And then as we output each word, let's output the first letter of the word, the number of letters in the word, and the last letter of the word. So if I think about that program, I want to have a main, and I think it would be good to have a function that prompts for input. So input sentence. I think we'll go ahead and create a process module to split our sentence, because we want to split it into a list of all these different words. And then let's do a function to output. Our output is going to be output a word. So we've been working with sentences, but then we'll split that up and be working with a word. So I want to get this on the board and kind of figure it out, because with Python, remember our function definition has to come before we can call it. So it's kind of nice to get an outline down of what our modules are going to look like. So I'm going to start out by saying that I know I'm going to have the first module I'm going to create is this input sentence. I'm not going to require any parameters for that, I don't think. And I'm just going to ask for a sentence. Now I'm going to call that from my main. So I'm going to go ahead and create my main. And we'll start out by calling our input sentence. Now I could go to a lot of work and create a whole outline of this whole program, but I'd have to put some fake code in there, right? Because PyCharm, the tool we're using, the IDE we're using, the development environment, is really picky with us, and it complains if we don't have some sort of code, indented code, after a def statement. Now, if we were using a different tool, we might not have that issue, but with the tool we're using, we do. So we're just going to create these two modules and not try to create an entire outline, because we want to get this to run as we go so that we can test. So let's create our input function. For our input function, let's print some sort of nice heading thing or something. I'm going to do some hyphens. We'll call it something super great. Make that the same. Okay, so for our sentence splitter here, I think I want one more line of just hyphens. And finally, I'd like to input a sentence. Enter a sentence to analyze. Now, because this is going to be a whole sentence, I kind of want to start with the cursor on a new line. So I'm going to do that \n control code to tell the system to move the cursor to a new line. And then I should be able to do that. Now, in order to get that sentence that our user types back to our main, we need to return it. And then in our main, we better save that data in a variable. Let's call our variable sentence. So now we're getting our sentence from our user. In order to make this something that we can test, we need to actually call our main. So I'll put a call for it down here at the very bottom. Call my main. And now I should be able to run this to test it. I've got my messages. And then enter a sentence to analyze. And my cursor is sitting down on the next line. With PyCharm, it can be kind of unpredictable. So it does look like that's working. Here is my sentence. And it got done. So can't tell a lot's going on there, but I could use the debugger. So if I use the debugger, I'd want to stop right here in my main. I'd want to debug that line of code, set my breakpoint there. So that means when my program starts, it's going to stop at this point and ask me if it wants me to take over. So let's do it. Instead of running it, I'm going to debug it. And I get my debug screens. It's showing me what's going on down here. And I see that my breakpoint has been encountered, that it stopped, sitting, waiting to execute this line of code, waiting for me to tell it to. Now, I don't want to, again, run all of the code and see the Python system stuff. So I'm going to use step into my code and make it go ahead and execute my input sentence function. Now I see, sure enough, it's jumped to my input sentence function. It's executing my first line to print out that output. It did that. I'm going to keep going. Now I need to look at the console because I need to be available to type in that sentence. I'm going to step into my code one more time so that that prompt is displayed. I enter a sentence to analyze. Here is a sentence. And I'm going to press enter. And then my program is finished. So I can see through my debugger code that it executed that function, and anytime it's just confusing, do that. Now right now it says that it's suspended. I'm going to click on that and turn off that breakpoint. We'll come back to that in a minute. So beautiful. Now the next thing we said we were going to do is split up the sentence. Well, if we split up the sentence, we need to take the sentence and decide what the individual words are. If I'm looking at my sentence here that I created, here is a sentence. Do you see anything, any sort of character or anything that we could use that's kind of a natural way for us to split that up into words? The spaces. So let's do it with the spaces. I want to create our method. We decided it's going to be called split sentence. And in our split sentence, we really do need something to work with, the sentence. So we are going to have an input parameter. And we can use the split function in Python. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at the split function. Let's search for it. Python split function. Take a look. What kind of output are we going to get from that split function? Is it going to be a string? Or is it going to be a list of strings? Let's try it and see. If we use this syntax right here, sentence.split, I am not specifying a special character to use to split on because the space is the default. So we can just say, yeah, split it based on the space because that makes sense. And then let's print the resulting variable named words that we get from that. So I'm going to run it. Put in my sentence. I didn't get anything out of my split sentence. Why is that? Didn't call it. Okay, so how do I call it? Where should I call it? Do I want to call it from my input sentence or from my main? From my main. So I want to call it from my main. And how would I call it? Do I just put its name? Does it need something else? It needs that sentence to be sent to it, right, as a parameter. So let's run it. Now we should see something. So that looks like it worked well. Our split worked good for our sentence. We have now an array or a list of words. So our words variable contains each of the words. That works handy for us. So instead of printing out words in our split sentence, let's return it. Now that means in our main, we need to catch it into some sort of variable. So I'm going to call it word list in our main because I want you to remember those variable names don't need to be the same. That'll work fine. We can make sure by putting our debugging print statement in our main and just print out word list after we've run our split sentence function. Let's try it. Looks just the same. So great. We've got the same data back to our main. Now again, as a new programmer, when we look at this function, we think, well, that seems like an awful lot of work to go through for just that one line of code. Why couldn't I just put that sentence dot split line of code right there in the main? Well, you could have, but then it wouldn't have been as logically oriented, as organized as it needs to be. Right now in our split sentence, we only have one line of code, but as this program develops, we might come up with other functional things that belong in that same function. No matter why, we want to have that logical split and make sure each function has a logical purpose. Okay, so in our main then, we're ready to do all of our output. So instead of just printing that word list, let's go use a for loop and say for each word in our word list, we're going to run our output word function. Now that output word function is going to need that word passed to it. And we haven't created it yet. So let's create it. I'm going to put it again above our main. Now, we know that we need to have a word as input. We said that our function here is we want to print out the word, the number of letters in the word, the first letter, and the last letter. So this output word is going to do a bit of work, isn't it? I might have to put those comments before our function. I think it would have been okay in there once I got that code going, but you know, it's just getting a little bit gripey with me, so I thought, okay, I'll fix it. So let's start out with what our word is. Let's print out our processed word. So that'll be a good start. Now let's print out how many letters are in this word. So we decided that length function would work for us, and we're going to use our word. Is our word an array? It is, and it's an array of letters. So each sentence was an array of words, right? Because we had all these different words in there. Now we find out that each word is just simply an array of letters. So I can refer to that word, that variable, as an array. So I can use it in these array or list functions like the length function. Now I am going to have to make that a string though, because remember that output from our length function is an integer. Now I feel like this is a good place to test, and I want to use a short sentence so that I don't get a lot of output, because I want to make sure that our length function is outputting this properly. Okay, so my sentence is going to be one word. So I've got my first word, one, has 3 letters. My second word, word, has 4 letters. So everybody's working okay? Working. So how could I print out the first letter in the word? I know that my word variable is like an array, so could I just use that index value 0? I should be able to. Try it and see if that works properly. Do some testing. Okay, so here's a sentence. Now I've got, for my word here, it says how many letters it has and what the first letter is. It looks correct. But I want to decide now, how could I get the last letter? Could I use that length variable? Could I, since this has 4 letters, could I just use that 4 as my index value to get that last letter? Can I? Is 4 the last index value in here? If we start with 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, isn't 4 too big? What's our biggest index value that we would have there? I'm going to try it. Now, if I say within my square brackets, I want the length of word, that should give me that number. I still need some more parentheses here. Too many. So everything was fine before I added in this line of code. Now let's run it and see if we're okay. Here's my sentence. Oh, nope, not happy. It started out with my word here. It said it has 4 letters and it got the first letter, but when it went to try to print that last letter, it said that index was out of range. Why is that? Yes.
I have a question
Yes.
about it's not working for me.
Okay, we'll fix it. You want to look at it? Can you share with us so everybody can see?
I'm not even zooming right now.
Oh, okay. Get in the Zoom so you can share with us. Do you have a shortcut for it? Because it's on the home screen of our Canvas course under that instructor link if you don't have the shortcut. I'm going to stop my share. It's much more funner to look at everybody's problems, if you don't mind. Find it. Oh, yeah. There it is.
He's saying that an argument is taken.
Okay, so look at where you're. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say it's because you didn't put the argument in the when you were defining the function. So there's supposed to be word as an argument for the function, and you didn't put it when you were defining it, but when you called it, you put an argument in there. So that's why it's confused.
Fix it? Yay, thanks. All right.
Stop sharing.
Yeah, unless you want to keep sharing. It's okay. Okay, so anyways, why does this one crash?
It says that the number is outside of range.
So why is it outside of range?
You start counting at 0.
Because it's starting counting at 0. And our length isn't starting counting at 0, is it? So subtract 1 from our length. And that is that, again, that coming off by 1 error. Let's run that and see if that fixes it. Looks good. Okay, I think we've accomplished our objective. If we look at our program, we prompt for input of a sentence, we split it up, and then we process each of those words. Let's add a few more comments because it's kind of empty. So in our split sentence function, this function uses the split function to split on spaces. So remember, if we wanted to split on some other character, to split on like a colon, we would say sentence dot split and then have the colon within our split parameter. And that can be really handy, and a lot of times you'll have commas or something separating a file that you need to use. And then let's add one more item here. Return the array of words to the caller. Now for our output word, we said we're going to print out the word, the number of letters in the word, the first letter and the last letter. So we did all of those things. I kind of feel like we should add one more thing here, that after we read in the sentence, we should output some information overall about our sentence, like how many words are in the sentence. So we could do that. Let's add a new function. Let's call it output sentence. And it's going to need our sentence to be passed to it. And I'll need to declare that function. Can I just do a length on that sentence statement, or do I need to do something different to that? I would have to do that split, wouldn't I? Now, looking at my function, in my declaration, I need to remember to specify that that sentence is going to be passed to us. And then I should be able to output how many words there are, but it's getting kind of convoluted. So I think I'll create a variable, count words, and set it equal to the length of my sentence split. And then I can just use count words in my print. I will, of course, need to convert that to a string. And then I'll add that statement. Does that seem logical? I don't know if I like that we're doing that sentence split twice. Let's run this and see if it works. Okay, sentence has 3 words, which is correct. And then it starts with the words. I just think that we don't have things quite logical because when we output our sentence, we're having to do that split again, and we're already doing that someplace. Should maybe our output sentence come after we split it? And then we could pass that our word list instead of just that sentence. Do. Now I'm making a few changes here just to drive me crazy. And instead of redoing that split, I'm thinking, if we just already had that split up list, our word list, then we could just print out how many words there are. And we wouldn't have to redo that logic that's already been done. Now, for us, that logic was only that one line of code, right? Doing that sentence split. But remember, that logic could be huge. You know, there could be lots of processing going on to come up with that output. So by us moving where we process that so that we were getting the right input data instead of the wrong input data, we can really clarify things and make things a lot nicer. Okay, let's run this. One more time. One more time. Now we shouldn't see any difference in our output. Still have 3 words. It's just that internally we've handled things a little bit better. Let's save that. That one should be a lot of the information that you need for the assignment. We'll work with arrays a little bit more again next week. For our last few labs, I'd like to look at doing some things that are a little bit different. There's this arcade library that's available if you look at Python for creating graphical type applications. There are some different libraries that are available. One that's really popular is called Pygame, and it's been around for a really long time. This one is newer. Actually, you can see this picture was like about a year old, which is pretty new for online content like this, right? So with Arcade, the developer of this library for Python stuff has taken the Pygame library and kind of tried to improve on it. So I'd like to see if we could get this started and split up into some groups to try and create some graphical applications. So let's see if we can install this. So we might run up against a brick wall really quickly, but let's see. We want to enter this command, pip space install space arcade. And it says you can likely just open up a command prompt on Windows and type it. Well, let's see how likely that is. I can click on the start menu and type CMD to locate a command prompt. And then I need to type pip install arcade. And pip stands for Python Installation Program or Python Install Program. And it's just a command line interface that lets us install new things or new libraries into our Python libraries. Oh my goodness, it's going to let us do it. These computers never let us do anything.
Access denied.
Ah, there we go. Well, we will work on that. In the meantime, let's see if we can do this. I want to try the import. We shouldn't be able to because it crashed, but let's see if it got far enough that we can do something. We'll see. I think I already closed out of PyCharm. I'm going to call mine arcade test. You guys might already be there knowing that it's not going to work. But I'm going to try this one, and I'm just going to do the import statement, import arcade. Yeah, and it's giving me an error, so it didn't create it. So let's see if we can do Pygame. All right, so I have this Pygame window open, and I just want to kind of try sort of the same thing so that we can see how to get started. So I'm going to do the import Pygame, and I know it's installed. Unfortunately, the arcade one is not. So I want to import Pygame, and I'm going to do this pygame.init. So that's going to initialize a new instance of this Pygame for me. Now I want to create a screen. My screen is going to use the Pygame library, and I want to use the display class. So in my Pygame library, I have all these different classes I can use. One of them is display, which has to do with my monitor. And I can use this display's function, set mode, and this will set my resolution, or the size actually of the screen. So let's set it to 400 by 300. And then we're going to declare a Boolean named done. And we're going to start out with that equal to false. And false needs to be uppercase in Python. Now we're going to create an infinite loop. While not done, in our for loop, we're going to be using a little bit different of a control than we've used in the past. And we're going to say that anytime a Pygame event occurs, like somebody clicks on something or presses a key or does something to cause some sort of action, an event, anytime we get one of those, we're going to execute something in this for loop. So if we look at that event and we see that it was pressing whatever game association we have with the quit function, then we're going to set our Boolean to true to exit that loop. Now I want to back tab, and this line of code is going to go equal with our for loop. We're going to say pygame.display.flip. So they say that this flip function is required because it basically swaps the buffers. It takes what you have been creating as output to the screen and puts it on the screen. So let's run this. Ah, there it is. Woohoo! That's what it's supposed to do. So not that great, but you get a black screen. Pygame, black screen. This is what you should see.
Mine's failing on the import or something.
Oh, okay.
There's no module called Pygame.
Let's check it. How about everybody else?
Yeah, I'm getting the same error.
Yours failing, some of you are getting it, some of you are failing. So I don't know if it's installed just on some of the computers. It's supposed to be on all of them. I'm gonna have to randomly check and see which ones have it. Can you try this one? See if it's different. Just do that import statement. Yeah, you can log in as many as you want. So it seems like it's just a few random computers that it doesn't have it. Mine isn't working. Oh, I have a high cash folder. You guys that are having trouble with it, can you try opening that program in idle? This is working in idle, but not in Python. So it might be some sort of like a reference library in Python that we don't have set. If it's working in idle. Oh, you fancy tool. It's a couple of people. Don't save in the Python folder and don't name it Pygame because that's the name of the library we're trying to import. So if you name your program Pygame, we're going to have some trouble. Those are those things I forget to say. Right, so you're just stuck. So try that one next week. We'll figure out what's going on with PyCharm, why it works for some of us and not for others, because we can probably get that one fixed. Let's draw some things. Here's a rectangle I'm going to put this up on the screen so that if you're ready, you can try it. And that's just going to draw this blue rectangle on the screen. If you're still fighting to get a computer going, good job. Now it says we want to draw this somewhere after the event pumping, meaning after that for loop, but before our display.flip. So pygame.draw.rect. Now where do we want to draw this rectangle? Well, on the screen. And we want to probably, oh, this is color. So we're going to say 0 is what they have. The rectangle size is going to be 128. And then 255. Oh, I wasn't reading it properly. So first, we're outputting it to the screen. That's our first parameter. The second parameter is within parentheses, and it's a 3-digit hex color code. So we're saying color 0, 128, 255. So we could look up hex color codes and see what color that code amounts to. Or we could look up hex color codes to change it to something that we liked better. But that's what that setting is. And then we're specifying the size of the rectangle, 30, 30, 60, 60. So here's what I have, and I'm going to try it. And there's my little blue box. So I want to try a different color. That hex code 0, 128, 255 is that blue color. But I'm going to search for hex color codes. And there's all sorts of different places where we could go. So I'm going to keep looking until I find one that I like, that shows me good hex values. I don't like all of these color code picker. This one's better. Okay, so I like htmlcolorcodes.com, and it's showing us the hexadecimal value and then the numeric value. So if I wanted to change to this kind of pea green, I would change those numbers to 219, 255, 51. See, 219, 255, 51. And run it. Now, how are you guys doing that we're having computer issues while we were looking at color codes here? Are you finding something to work?
I worked on that one, but pronounced.
Okay. That's fine. We're just experimenting here a little bit. See how we can look at this library and kind of pull stuff from it. You're watching all from broken computer fails. Now, they have some code here that gets pretty crazy right away. So I didn't really review this website or anything. I just wanted us to look at Pygame so that you could see that these kinds of things are available. So take a look at it and see if some things that we can do in our lab time before the end of the semester. But I wanted to give you guys some time to work on the unit exam that was due tonight. And then, of course, we have a little bit of extension on that one that's due next week. But let me know if you need any help with anything. We'll just call this lab time while we figure out why the computers won't cooperate. Any questions?
So that thing with the name that we're doing, that's due Thursday?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday?
Next Thursday. So you've got time.
I've already started it, but mine's doing some weird crap, so.
Okay. It's kind of complicated. It doesn't seem
Yeah,
like it at first,
it's
but
really
it's
hard.
challenging.
But
So
I'm kind of just going off of what we did today
Uh-huh.
with the sentences, but I'm just replacing some of them with, instead of words, I just put letters, blah, 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 you know what I'm talking about. But
yeah,
it's not working, so.
you'll
I'll-
get it.
I'm gonna
So
try and
yeah,
figure
if
it
you
out.
need help, but yeah, I wanted to give you extra time so you could really
Yeah.
analyze it. You can analyze it.
Things were
Uh-huh.
all of a sudden, not going up again. I had this to the direction. Oh, this one. But don't. No, this one. Oh, right there. Yeah. All right.
It's always you. No, I'm just kidding.
I have trouble with
It always seems like it's the stupid computer.